running fiscal surpluses builds up funds. So this is a really classic one that governments are facing age. So they relate it to a real problem, the ageing society problem, rising dependency ratios. That will reduce the mix, reduce the number of people that are actually productive in our economies, our societies, and render more people who are dependent on the productivity of a smaller group. That's what a rising dependency ratio is. And they construct that as a financial crisis because characters like me are going to need health care and pensions and all that stuff. And the government will run out of money being able to provide that. That's how they construct it. So then they say we've got to save up now to build up the capacity to be able to fund the ageing society needs. And so that's a sort of smokescreen they use for running surpluses or trying to run surplus or running austerity. Now, the first point is that the ageing society issue is real. The countries, many of our advanced countries, and Japan's leading the way, have rising dependency ratios. But that's not a financial problem, that's a productivity problem. The problem is that we're going to require our children to be more productive than we are because there's less of them producing and there's more of us being dependent on what they produce for our material standard of living. So they've got to be more productive than we were. That's the problem. And so if you reconstruct the problem like that, then what that motivates is a discussion on, well, what can the government do to enhance productivity? Well, what enhances productivity? Education is the primary. Research and education are the things that allow a society to be more productive. And what does austerity do when you construct it as a financial problem and therefore pretend you've got to save up? Well, austerity tends to hack into education and research. Austerity tends to hack into the opportunities of young school leavers to get work experience and training. The very things that are going to make them more productive. We've now got a rising cohort called the NEETs. The NEETs are not in employment, education or training. They're teenagers who are dislocated from the system, from the typical pathways, from formal schooling into training into paid work. Austerity is generating a lost generation of kids. And they're our future productivity. So it's exactly in Australia we're having these massive cutbacks in education and apprenticeship training and all of the things that generated the high productivity growth in the 60s that gave people like me, as I was growing up in that era, massive material benefits and mobility options upwards. And so the answer, fiscal surpluses undermine, exacerbate the ageing society problem. They don't give anything to help it. And the primer on it is that the ability of the government to spend today has no bearing on what it did yesterday. Running a fiscal surplus gives the government no extra funds to spend today than it had yesterday. Governments do not save. So this is a sort of, again, an analogy with households. We save. Why do we save? Why do we sacrifice why do we not spend all of our income? Because we want to have higher future consumption possibilities. And how do we achieve that given we're financially constrained? We forego consumption today, we put it in the bank and earn a bit of interest rate, pitiful these days, but that gives us higher consumption possibilities in the future, as long as inflation doesn't outstrip it. We have to do that to increase our future consumption. That's what the role of saving is. But a currency issuing government doesn't have to do that because it can buy tomorrow whatever it wants that's available.
The criticism we often come up with there is they go, but Norway, the wealth fund, look what they've done. They can afford all this stuff.